I remember, I think it's in my book, a wonderful, beautiful female publisher taking me for a drink. I'd written practically nothing then, suggesting I might like to write a book for an American publishing house that you'd have heard of in some Sky Bar in Manhattan. This was already good enough. I was 20. But her very solemnly suddenly saying to me, of course, the great advantage of you guys is that you have irony, which we don't. And I thought, well, I can't say nothing to that. But the best I'm going to be able to say is, well, apparently not. and instantly regretting saying so. And her looking just a little bit bewildered. I thought, I must be careful not to do that again.
You remind me of what you also say. It's about, and you use the word, girls, women in America being forward.
Mm. Well, yes. I mean, this I'd actually discovered in London for myself, that there was something different about American womanhood. Martin Amis in The Pregnant Widow most recently has sort of speculated that the real sexy ability of a woman can be defined as how much she can think like a man. Not in all things, but in the sexual relation. She can kind of picture what a man might be thinking. Very important. It seems to me American women were kind of born with that. And sort of had ideas of their own and would even make suggestions. You see me now, the slightly faded figure of a formerly magnificent mammal primate. But I used to have a really English reticence in that respect. I would always hope someone else would make the first move. I'd like to, or if I was going to make it, that somehow it had been cleared in advance. In a wonderful, unspoken way, American women seem to sort of allow you to skip that stage.
but
the word English rose still makes me contract and retract as well, I have to say. It still does.
On going back to the politics of it, because, I mean, you were in the International Socialists for a long time. We should explain this was a sort of left-wing sect group, which, well, I mean, I'd probably allow you to characterize it, which, as it were.
Happily do it. It was the word for it, rather understated, was not group or even groupuscule, let alone party, but a tendency. In other words, it was a thread in the argument over the future of Marxism and of a theory for the working class. And it came out of the left opposition. It's vulgarly called Trotskyist. I don't mind. It's a good enough shorthand for it. Which, in other words, from the only political tradition in Europe in the 20th century that had managed to oppose Stalinism, fascism, and imperialism at the same time, and deserves some credit for that, and is associated with some heroic figures.
Reading what you have to say about it, you're relatively kind and sympathetic towards it, because I've also spoken to your brother about it.
Yeah.
Compared to him, I mean, he now sweeps it aside as almost an absurd youthful indulgence. But you treat it quite sympathetically, insofar as some of the figures who are associated with it were figures you perhaps have gone on admiring, or you admired, if you like, the almost openness of it compared to some of the other left-wing sects, groupuscules, tendencies.
Indeed. For one thing, the writers and essayists and fighters who made up our tradition. I mean, once you've taken out the sort of grand heroic figures like Rosa Luxemburg or Trotsky or Andres Nin in Spain in Catalonia in the Civil War, people like C.L.R. James, the brilliant Trinidadian polemicist and historian. His book Black Jacobins is the really authentic history of the Haitian Revolution and the historic importance of that. Also a great writer about cricket, by the way. All these comrades tended to be polymaths. Victor Serge, whose Memoirs of a Revolutionary anticipate Solzhenitsyn in what they say about the Gulag. may have been, probably was the man who first used the word totalitarian to describe the new symbiosis of Stalinism with more traditional forms of oppression.
Yes, I mean, that was one of the...
People like that. Yeah. That's who you were encouraged to read. This is still a sort of half-buried but still alive tradition, both in literature and in politics and in the history of ideology, and I think it's an honourable one, shouldn't be obliterated. And then its best-known figure, exemplar, in our culture is probably George Orwell, I mean, who at the time regarded those people as comrades, in some cases had friendships with them. One could add Dwight MacDonald, Arthur Koestler, a few others. This is a kind of red thread through the history of the 20th century that most people who brought up to think in Cold War terms either don't or can't understand.
It was an anti-totalitarian thread, wasn't it?
Yes.
I mean, because what IS did was to criticize the Soviet Union at a time when other people were making excuses for it, or suggesting it was going through a rather nasty phase, but eventually socialism would be realized.
That's right. No, we thought the Soviet Union was beyond reform, and not only that, but we were fairly sure it couldn't last. I mean, if there was ever a conflict between the forces and relations of production, to borrow a Marxist expression, it was there. I mean, the bureaucracy couldn't allow people to think for themselves or to innovate in production because, or distribution or exchange, because anything like that, any sign of initiative, could be the death of the regime. Was actually more easy to analyze in Marxist terms, in some ways, than later Western capitalism was, because it was like a clockwork, rusted version of early Victorian capitalism. And so when people say no one saw the end of the Berlin Wall coming, except a few people like, admittedly true of Robert Conquest and a couple of others, it's not true of us. I mean, we not only thought it was coming, we thought we could analyze why it would come and that it would be a good thing.
But how much...
But this did not reconcile us to other incredible things that were happening when I was a young man in the late 60s. The takeover of Greece by a NATO military dictatorship, for example. The waging of a filthy war in Africa by Portugal, another NATO Western country. The obliteration of the ecology and people of Vietnam. The persistent alliance with a form of slavery in South Africa, run by the Dutch Reformed Church ideology of Calvinism.
In many cases, these, of course, things that you reported on yourself and wrote about.
Yeah, in time I lived to write about all those things and visit the scene of the crime, yeah.